All right. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Monday, November 15th of 2021. Thank you for tuning into the stream today. Hope you guys all had a great weekend and hopefully a great weekend of DFS. Maybe NFL Sunday was kind to you. Had a decent day overall myself. Ended up being profitable in the main slate and the Showdown slate. So decent Sunday overall. Definitely always take a profitable day. Maybe you played a little bit of MMA or NBA or NHL or something this weekend too. So hope you all had a great weekend. It is Monday here, as I mentioned, which means we've got a few things to do on stream today. I'll be announcing the winners of this week's weekly max challenge and also doing our giveaway for our weekly max challenge giveaway winners for today. And then, of course, answering your questions. I know Monday always have a lot of questions. We do have a few in the queue today, so plenty to talk about. But if you've got questions, go ahead and pop them into the YouTube chat or the Office Hours channel on Slack. We'll tackle questions roughly chronological order. So on a Monday, I know we're going to be doing this giveaway. We're going to be announcing winners at the start of the stream. So we do end up building a pretty good queue of questions here, building up pretty quickly. So if you want your question answered on today's stream, get it in the queue now. Go ahead and ask it now, and then I will get to them in the order that they come in. I see CK's here. He said, just joined SaberSim, excited and skeptical at the same time. That's good. Skepticism, healthy skepticism is what you need to be successful playing DFS anyway. So I'm glad to hear you're a little skeptical. Welcome to the stream. I do this stream Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's open Q&A, answer questions that we get in through YouTube chat and through our Slack channel, of which if you are interested in joining, there's a link to join the Slack community in the description of every past Office Hours video. So go check that out if you want to get in there. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive into it. I see a few more people are joining now. So welcome everybody. And of course, everybody that watches this show as a recording after, hello to you too. Thank you for tuning in. But let's start diving in here. So again, first thing we're doing here today, same thing we do every Monday, announcing the winners of the weekly max challenge and our giveaway winners. For those of you that don't know what this is all about, we have been doing this giveaway all NFL season long. It's not too late to get involved. All you have to do is max out either the pooch punt or the mini max, the 5-cent pooch punt on FanDuel or the 50-cent mini max on DraftKings for the NFL Sunday main slate. You have to max it out. That's two different price points, $7.50 to max out on one side, $75 to max out on the other. You need to wear a SaberSim avatar, SaberSim logo avatar as your avatar for the contest. And then before 1 o'clock Eastern on Monday, just send us a screenshot that shows your username, that shows you're entered into the right contest, and it shows your SaberSim avatar to Andy@SaberSim.com, and you're eligible for all these prizes. If somebody binks the contest, we're going to send you a bunch of cash, free SaberSim, and you get some custom championship gear. We also awarding the winner, the highest scoring person that enters this contest every week on both sites, free tickets to play next week or whenever you want to use them. You also get free SaberSim, and you get access to a free roll that we're going to be doing, again, on both sites before the end of the season. And for those of you that have been sticking with this for every single week of the season so far, entering every single week, get into that part of the year coming up on week, is it 10 or it's week 11 this week here? So really zooming through the season here. If you play all 18 weeks, guaranteed prizes. You get some free Yeti gear, also get some free SaberSim, and you get access to that same free roll at the end of the year. Of course, don't even have to win necessarily. We're doing a giveaway every single Monday for 3 winners on the DraftKings side, 10 winners on the FanDuel side to play the contest for free the next week. So really just a ton of awesome prizes. Totally recommend getting signed up for this and participating because you've got a very... We're having about 50 to 70, depending on the week, people enter for each site. So with all the giveaways and all the prizes you get just for coming in first, it's really a positive EV contest. So definitely recommend playing with it. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump in here. So first things first, let's talk about our winners for this week. Another week where lots of SaberSim logos at the top of these contests. So awesome to see here. Our winner on DK, 8th place in the mini-max for the NFL Sunday ticket, or NFL Sunday ticket. What? NFL Sunday main slate. I'm sitting here still thinking I'm watching Red Zone yesterday. The NFL main slate is LOLZ ZZZ, LOLZZZ 123, 8th place in the DraftKings mini-max yesterday. So congratulations, LOLZ. You will win. I can't believe it. I still haven't updated this, but it's actually 2 tickets to single entry contest, the $50 Red Zone and the $27 blind side. You get a free month of SaberSim and a free entry into that free roll at the end of the season. And on FanDuel, 45th place, also a very impressive result considering just how big this pooch punt contest is. Daily Big Kahuna takes down 45th in the FanDuel pooch punt. So we'll be sending you $25 in SaberSim credit, along with a free month of SaberSim and an entry into a private $1,000 free roll at the end of the season. Both of these guys have participated in the Weekly Max Challenge every single week of the season, which we love to see. Keep it up. Still eligible for that full 18-week prize at the end of the year. Just goes to show you, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? That's why this contest is set up the way it is. You play it with a strong process, with good contest selection and bankroll management principles week after week, and you have that top 1% outcome hit in your favor when the time comes. So anyway, let's go ahead. We'll jump now into the giveaways. So we'll pull up our trusty wheel of names spinner. This thing has worked overtime for us all year. Let's go ahead and get into it. So on DraftKings, we'll do DraftKings first. 3 winners for the DraftKings side. I have 54 names today. So let me go ahead and grab our 54 names. And we're going to spin 3 times for 150 free tickets to next week's Minimax. So our first winner for this week on the DraftKings side is Benny 2603. Congratulations. 150 free tickets to the Minimax next week. Our winner number 2 here is Shady Advice. Congratulations, Shady. Shady also gives out great advice in the Slack channel. Don't be confused by his name. We appreciate all the great DFS strategy advice and things like that you give in our Slack community. Shady also was on the right side of a $25,000 showdown win, I think, last week. So running a little hot here for Shady. Congratulations. And our third winner on the DraftKings side for this week is Rusty Trombone, who also took it down this last week. Impressive. Didn't, I guess, let me say, take it down, right? Also won the free tickets last week. So you can win this multiple times. You can win on both sites. Just another reason to participate. Congratulations, Rusty Trombone, on a bit of a giveaway heater here. So on the DraftKings side, our 3 winners, Benny 2603, Shady Advice, and Rusty Trombone, all playing the Minimax for free next week in week 11. Let me write these down here so I've got a note. And we'll go ahead and get right into the FanDuel side of things. So, FanDuel, I've got 61 names. And we're going to pull the lever 10 times here. So, let's go ahead and get these in. You got like a 1 in 6 shot of winning this here on the FanDuel side. So, pretty good odds. Again, I think there's a note here. We're working on an official agreement with FanDuel. I know week 11 has taken a lot of time for us to get this set up. I think, frankly, what is probably going to end up happening is for this entire season, we're going to be giving out these rewards as SaberSim credit. So you get a credit against your next month's invoice, which it all works out in the wash. But we are planning on continuing to do these giveaways for other sports, other seasons, things like that. So we'll work on getting this organized with FanDuel so we can start awarding tickets. But these 10 pulls of the lever here are going to be for $7.50 in SaberSim credit, pays for your next week's Pooch Punt entries. And let's get right into it here. I did need to clear that results list real quick. So there we go. Snack King 123 is our first winner. Always love that name. I do this show here at noon my time, local time here, and always am getting a little hungry here. So Snack King 123 takes down our first win. Oh, right on the edge. Sports Fan 14 though is our second winner. And our third winner here is War Helmet. if you win in multiple weeks on the FanDuel side as well, this will all stack. So if you win $7.50, $7.50, it's all stacking against that next month's payment. This one is J115. Congratulations, J115. Big Wig 500. Congratulations, Big Wig. All right, let's keep it going. Oh no! Super Slow 6-0 has been on the wrong side of it twice here. Congratulations to Marcus or Tamakas. If you're here, let me know how to pronounce that. I know sometimes I mispronounce these names here. But man, Super Slow, your time is coming, I promise. Man, I think actually Super Slow won some free tickets last week, if I remember correctly. So all things working out here. But winner number 7 here, Ghost Rider 90. Congratulations, Ghost Rider. And it's BCW, our 8th winner. 2 more for this week. And it's LZP NSX. Let me know, LZP NSX. Curious where you got your username. If it stands for something, or let me know. I'm always curious. I'm starting to see these names pretty frequently every week, and I'm curious just where everybody got their names. But anyway, our last poll of the Week 10 giveaway here on the FanDuel side. Phantom 2015. Congratulations, Phantom. Phantom, definitely a regular in office hours too. Always here asking questions. So congratulations, Phantom. Our 10th and final winner on the FanDuel side this week. So again, congratulations to all of our winners this week. Our 2 winners of the top prizes or the top overall scores, Lulz 123 and Daily Big Kahuna. And of course, our 13 winners here for the DraftKings and FanDuel giveaway tickets. So you guys will all get an email before the end of the day letting you know that you won and how and when to expect your tickets or SaberSim credit being delivered to your account. And we will go forward and do another one of these here coming up for week 11. So glad this has been successful. It seems like everybody is enjoying this as much as I am. So awesome to see this being a success so far this season. But with that, we'll go ahead and start to transition here and move into open Q&A, answering some questions. Before we get into that, a few comments that have come in here. Raquan said, been at DFS with SaberSim for a month, still no big wins, but I believe in the process, learning more and more every week. Hey, that makes sense. Glad you're here. Glad you're enjoying it. It takes a long time to realize your expected value, realize your profitability in your process. So that's why contest selection, bankroll management principles are crucial in being successful in DFS in the long term. Appreciate Kyle. Kyle said I'm the GOAT. I don't think that's the case, but appreciate the kind words here. And thanks for tuning into the stream here. Aaron said, I'm already, this must be Snack King. I'm always trying different snacks from different stores. So my girlfriend said you're the king of snacks. That's perfect. I love that. All right, guys, let's go ahead. We'll get right into questions here. I'm going to, let's see, where are we going to start today? Let's go ahead and hit these questions that came in over the weekend through Slack. I'm going to actually start here. This came in Friday night. This was from Steve. It looks like there's been some discussion in Slack already here, but Steve said the default for NBA Showdown 20 max has a min salary at 3,500. Assume that's 35,000. That seems crazy low. How do you determine what you'll use for min salary? I've been trying to stay above 49,000, but I do get duped a great deal. Yeah, I think you can almost completely ignore min salary for Showdown, regardless of sport. The lineups that you get are going to be. I'll just show you exactly what I mean here. So let's go find an NBA Showdown. So let's say we're playing the Boston and Cleveland Showdown, which probably would be a pretty good basketball game today. Who thought Cleveland would look as good as they do to start the year? But anyway, so yeah, min salary is at 35,000. I think even if this was zero, you'd be totally fine. And the reason why is because on almost any showdown lineup you build with SaberSim, your sim variance is going to be at 10, which means every single lineup we're building comes from a single game simulation from our thousands of game sims of this game. You're getting an optimal lineup that fits a certain game sim, slightly adjusted for a little bit of ownership fade, depending on where your sliders are set. But that means even if we turn min salary to zero, and let's just take a look. Let's build some lineups. I haven't played any NBA Showdown yet this year. Been hitting the main slates pretty hard with all the late swapping you have to do. Haven't had time to pull into showdowns, but definitely want to, and maybe on a smaller slate like tomorrow, I might dive into a couple showdowns. But let's go ahead. We'll adjust projections to see the lineups, and I just want to look and see. So first of all of these lineups, as I mentioned before, again, are an optimal from an individual game sim, which is basically what we're trying to do in Showdown, right? We're trying to build the optimal lineup for the game outcome that's actually going to happen tonight. So sampling those simulations and building lineups around them is an extremely successful way to build these lineups. But let's go look and just see what like the lowest salary lineups we have are. So you can see we don't actually even have a lineup below the min salary of zero, but we do have some very low salary lineups. But again, these rest on the safety, I guess, of knowing that there is a game sim of the way this game played out where this lineup is optimal. So I think you can limit your min salary to go a little bit higher, but I do think you're going to expose yourself to being duplicated more while adding very little to your actual. I don't think the lineups that are built between 49,000 and 50,000 are necessarily significantly more likely to win than some of the very low salary min salary lineups you can have. And these very low min salary lineups are incredibly unlikely to be duplicated. They are very, very unlikely to be duplicated amongst the field. So I do think setting your min salary to 40K is probably, or what is it, 49 especially, is probably really just duping yourself. In NBA, smaller contests are going to be a little bit smaller, and players are normally distributed, and salary players' actual scores are a little more correlated to their salary. I think it could be sold on the idea that maybe you want to at least set a floor of like 40K, but I still don't think you add a lot of value in NFL, especially if you're playing the biggest multi-entry stuff. I am thrilled when I see a lineup that looks good, that SaberSim builds me, and is like 1,000 or more under the salary cap. I'm thrilled. In fact, I do a little bit of work sometimes to go through and specifically try to find low salary lineups, because people building with traditional optimizers, building by hand, are never going to land on those lineups. You have a very low chance of being duplicated, or you have a much lower chance of being duplicated playing lineups at min salary or low min salary. So I wouldn't touch this. I would leave it where it is by default. I think 35,000 is fine as a decent floor. You're not going to build a lot lower than that anyway, but it's nice to have those lineups that can be significantly under the salary, because there are times when it makes sense to do that. So Alfred had a question here, and it sounds like he was maybe running into an issue with the filters. But he said, I have a filter running that excludes any player with projections less than 4. I deselected the green checkmark for defense because I don't want to apply the filter to that position, but the tool is now marking all defense choices removed in step 1. Has anyone else seen this? What's funny is I actually do this exact thing, and I have never seen this before. So I'll do a quick demo of what I do, and maybe we can talk through it. But I do some of the similar thing here. While this is loading, I just saw this question come in. Welcome, Joshua. He said, do you ask questions here in chat? That's perfect. You can pop your questions right into YouTube chat. I answer questions in roughly the chronological order that they come in as best I can. So we've got a handful. We've got a queue of maybe a half dozen questions that came in over the weekend that I will answer here. And then we'll jump into the questions that are coming in live. I see Nancy Drew guy asked a question as well. So we'll get to everybody's questions. But yeah, so I do this process that Alfred, almost said Albert. Alfred asked here. So using this filter pool, right? I actually typically end up turning this up a little bit. So I like to use it like 6 or 7. I exclude QBs too. But yeah, so if you uncheck your defense here, right? So it starts like this. The default will look like this. This is your default. It's just going to chop off everybody under 3. But if you change this to, let's just say 5 and remove defense and click apply, should be okay. All the defenses are still in the pool. If we go to the flex and sort this way and show removed players. We don't have any players that are running back, wide receiver, tight end, QB projected under 5. So it appears to me that everything is going well. Alfred, I would say if you watch this, let me know if you're doing anything differently here that I'm not thinking about, or perhaps if you're doing this on a different site or slate type. It is possible that there is maybe some kind of minor issue here, but should work all as intended. So let me know here what might be going on there. But let's keep it going. CMC Man has a question. He said, is there a way to export the min and max exposures you set in a build to the player pool in step 1? There isn't, in terms of the way the functionality is currently set up. This actually, we started hearing about this question a little bit more when we pushed out this redesign that we pushed out earlier, late in the summer, early fall here. And frankly, I actually didn't really realize people were using the tool that way. None of us did, that people were taking their exposures in step 3 and exporting them at all. So we've talked about adding that in a way of just being able to go to a build or something like that and just download exposures in a different file or something like that. So that is something that we've talked about adding here in the future. So these numbers, right? Your exposures, being able to actually export these. I will say I'm not going to do a full demo of this on stream because I think it's a little bit too much Excel and not enough SaberSim. But if you have something going on the Excel side, right? This kind of question makes me think you've got maybe something going on outside of SaberSim as a part of your process. I would look into what is called a count if function. And you can use a count if function in Excel to download your entire pool of lineups, right? So download your entire pool of lineups and then use a count if function on the player ID, scanning all your lineups. And you can pretty quickly just rebuild the exposure percentages in the Excel file. So I realize that's not going to be useful for the majority of people that maybe are watching this here. But if you have a little bit of Excel background and maybe you're building this into your process, I'm not really sure maybe necessarily what your plan is to do with these exposures here. But you can use that's the easiest way to do it right now, is to download all of your lineups, use a count if function in Excel to rebuild those exposures on your end, and then you can re-upload them here. So we do have the upload. The upload function is totally functional. So you can upload a CSV that has a name, projection, and ownership if you wanted to, but also your min and max exposure that you want for a player, and then just upload right there. That's the easiest way to do that. So, but there you go. Luke had a question here, and I'm not going to be able to answer this, but I do want to just mention it since, I've got the audience here. But Luke yesterday asked, where's the 8 p.m. single game for NHL? And I apologize, Luke, that nobody got back to you. For everybody watching this here, if you're running into an issue that something's not working for you, it's kind of urgent, or you're missing a slate or a game or something like that, post that into the support channel. The support channel is flagged for us. We'll be able to get and resolve issues that are actually affecting your experience much more quickly than the Office Hours channel here. Most of the time, the Office Hours channel is really just for me, and I answer these questions on stream. But hopefully we were able to resolve that problem for you, Luke. But in the future, for everybody listening here, all questions where you're facing an issue, something's not working, something's missing, etc., post that. Email us, first of all, maybe if you want, support@sabersim.com, or post your questions into the support channel in Slack. Let's go ahead and get this next question. This is from Jared. And Jared said, with SaberSim builds your lineups, does value take precedent over correlation? And this is a really good question. And I wanted to talk about this one a little bit because the answer really is that value isn't really taken into account in the way that a traditional optimizer builds lineups, right? So SaberSim is different than a traditional optimizer, but what a traditional optimizer does is it just optimizes for average projection, right? You can set all kinds of crazy rules to make it do things better. You can say optimize for average projection, but include a QB +2 stack in every lineup, or optimize for average projection, but don't use a set of players that has a max ownership over a certain amount, or optimize for average projection, but I have 40 player grouping rules that I want to include, right? And all of those things are basically intended to try to get lineups with upside while using a tool that's not built to build lineups with upside. And what SaberSim does that's different right off the bat here is really this sim variance slider. What's happening here is when you build a lineup with SaberSim, the higher sim variance is, the smaller the bucket of random game simulations we use to determine the projections for each player then when we build the lineup. So we don't actually care about this value column, the average point per dollar, when we're building any lineup, unless you have your sim variance slider set at 0, which you would only want to do for cash games. For any other lineup you're building with SaberSim, we're actually randomly sampling our thousands of game simulations we have for each game and using the projections those players, or the outcomes, the actual fantasy points those players scored in those game sims to then build the best lineup around it. So value isn't really taken into account at all, the average point per dollar value of a player, right? And that's a good thing. Optimizing for average projection is a fault of traditional tools, and this is how SaberSim solves that problem. Now, in a sport like NBA, right, where players are normally distributed, right, players' range of outcomes looks generally like a bell curve. We'll pull one up here just so we can see it, right? Jokic's outcomes look generally like a bell curve here. And sim variance is going to be lower, not a lot lower, but a little bit lower than you see on other sports, right? The effect that has is ultimately the higher point per dollar average projected players do show up in your lineups more, but that's not necessarily the case for a sport like NFL and definitely not for a sport like MLB. But from there, thinking about what's taking precedent on your lineups, right? The sliders kind of help solve that problem, right? So like even let's go back to football because football is a higher correlation sport. So let's look at the main slate again. Right. So in effect, when we have these sliders, right, we are taking into account the player's range of outcomes and the variance of the player a bit more than we are taking overall the effects of correlation when we're building each individual lineup, but both are used, right? So I would say value is actually like average point per dollar value of a player is taken into account very little with SaberSim, and that's a good thing, right? It allows us to actually get real upside and variance into our lineups. Correlation is valued depending on where the individual sport is set. Like I think in baseball on default sliders, you will actually see quite a few slates where your correlation slider is a bit higher than your variance slider, but yeah. So good question. Jared said, it did that with the NFL afternoon games. I only had 3, then logged out and showed up with the 4 games. The one thing I would say here is with football in particular, it's always good. There are so many slates, right? Football DFS is so popular that DraftKings has a slate for almost every individual combination of games and different start times and things like that. I would say always just make sure that you're actually selecting the right slate to begin with here. We default this to kind of what we think is the next biggest slate that's coming up that we think people are going to play. But you can see here, like on DraftKings, there is an afternoon only 4-game slate, which is commonly referred to as the afternoon slate. But then there is also the 425 afternoon turbo, which is only a 2-game slate. I'm sure FanDuel and Yahoo have similar things there as well. We can look here. So, I mean, you can see that I have to scroll down just to see all the slates. So they have an express slate. They also have a 6-game slate that includes the afternoon games and the Sunday, Monday. So I would say just double check and make sure you always have the right slate selected here up top when you're building your lineups here. So. Question from Ruben here on the contest selection side of things. Always love contest selection, bankroll management questions. He said, it seems like once you reach a certain bankroll, like 30K plus, there's going to be inevitable sacrifices that need to be made to get more action down, such as choosing higher stakes contests that go against the percent of bankroll per entry criteria, the effective entrance criteria, etc. At the point where one's bankroll gets to that point, would you recommend going into some of those unfavorable contests for more action first, or maxing out on the favorable contest and building my sports betting bankroll, or the third option being expanding into other sports such as NHL and MMA and building up skill in low stakes contests in those sports as well. All of the above are really options here. I think, yeah. So I've even talked about this in those videos here. Sharp observation, right? There's going to be a point where there are not enough contests for you to play where you get down all of your action in the best contest that we recommend. 1,000 plus effective entrants. Play under $3 when possible. Don't play more than 0.5% of your bankroll in any one entry. Play 5% maximum of your bankroll in any one set of correlated slates, right? These are kind of like our fundamentals of bankroll management and contest selection principles. And you do reach that point where you run out. So for NBA, I actually put this video up here on our YouTube channel. It's under strategy sessions, the fastest way to crush NBA DFS in 2021. Full breakdown of the DraftKings and FanDuel lobby of the best contest to play. But we hit that point of about 20K to 30K in your bankroll where you just can't get any more action down in good contests. I think it is ultimately a little bit up to you of where you want to go from there. There are good places to get your action down, right? But it depends on what you want to play. I think for the average player, I think by far the best thing I could recommend is to branch out to another site. So if you've played all the best DraftKings contests on an NBA DFS slate, you're filling in all the best contests, you're not playing anything that doesn't fit into our principles, that's a good time, I think, then to maybe get some money into FanDuel and go play some FanDuel contests, because FanDuel has a big run of great contests too. Yahoo is a great place to go as well. Yahoo's contests, we talked about this last week, won't fit the principles of our contest selection principles as well because they're smaller contests, but the rake is way lower. The payout structures are really flat. They've literally banned a bunch of players that are winning players in the long term, and Yahoo is just a great place to play almost virtually any contest that they have. So Yahoo's a good place to go. But let's say you've already done that, or for one reason or another, maybe you only have access to one site. You can't do that. I think another option is to branch out into some cash games, right? Cash game, your ROI is going to be a lot lower over the long term, but if you're filling out all the best GPPs already, you can get some really good action down in cash games playing things like head-to-heads under $3 and single entry double ups and 50-50s with 1,000 or more effective entrants, or 1,000 or more entrants. Those can be really great options to play as well. I think the idea of actually putting some money into the betting sides of things can also be a really interesting way of getting more action down. And I would say start with props. So if you're playing all of the best GPPs on the DFS side already and you don't want to dive into cash games and you maybe can't get into another site, I would say thinking about checking out the prop betting tool on SaberSim here and getting into the prop betting world can also be a very, very strong approach. Beating closing lines on the main markets is tough. Our model gets there, and especially, for last baseball season, we beat closing lines on money lines, spreads, and totals for baseball last year with just our recommended bets here, right? But props can be extremely lucrative, and especially if you are new to sportsbooks and will start with basically no limits, you can get quite a bit of action down quickly using our prop betting tool and going that direction. I do think branching out into other sports is fine as well, but I always kind of think about my sports as like separate, right? I don't know if I had a big bankroll and I had maxed out all of the NBA GPPs or something like that. I don't know if I would think about I wouldn't necessarily want to just go start playing hockey DFS or something like that just because I'm trying to get additional action down, right? I do think it would be wise, especially if you don't know anything about that particular sport or are new to that sport. I think you could probably find better ways to spend your money than thinking about putting your extra surplus available action you can play on a given night into hockey just to get it down. I think probably at that point, playing a different site or playing cash games or going into some props would be a better approach. I will say also too, our rules for contest selection are definitely intended for earlier bankroll growth, right? And there are obviously a lot of successful DFS players that are not following these rules because, for example, the main flagship GPP on any given night on FanDuel or DraftKings doesn't fit these, right? Like the main $15 on DraftKings doesn't fit our contest selection principles. If you've been successful playing DFS and have built up a bankroll to this point, and you are confident in your ability to continue playing at the medium to higher stakes, at some point, those contests make sense to play too. So there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I would say if you've exhausted other options, but you've continued to grow and get better and better, like at some point it makes sense to play contests that are under 1,000 effective entrants, or don't have as good of a payout structure, or are representing more than 0.5% of your bankroll. So, but a really good question. And there's really a lot of different ways to go here. In my order of what I would recommend here is, once you filled out all those best contests, jump to a different site, play the best contest there, the best GPPs, then start looking at some cash games. And then if you're interested, right, because prop betting is a totally different game than DFS is, then I would say think about maybe playing some props for that sport, and then consider jumping into contests that just don't fit our principles as well. And if you're new here and you're watching this for the first time and you're like, what are the bankroll management principles? What are the contest selection and bankroll management principles? What is this guy talking about? I would check out on our YouTube channel, SaberSim YouTube, under strategy sessions. Depending on your sport, if you're looking for NBA, the fastest way to crush NBA DFS in 2021. And if you want football, if you click on the strategy sessions here, how to double your NFL DFS ROI in 15 minutes. This is also a contest selection. And we literally go through the lobbies of these two sports and explain what the best contests are and why. So when I'm saying once you've played all the best contests on a given site, I'm talking about the contests that we specifically highlight in the NFL and NBA contest selection videos here. So I highly recommend going and watching those. So cool. All right. I'm going to answer this real quick because it's relevant here. Desmond said, how do you handle sports where there are virtually no contests with 1,000 effective entrants? NHL is an example. The only ones that do are single entry for the most part. Yeah. So, this has come up before here. Some esports, NHL, some smaller sites, Yahoo in particular, right? You're not going to have those 1,000 effective entrants options. I think there's a few options. I think the first is to just use it as a guideline, right? And identify the contests that have the most effective entrants and play those, right? Like if you can't get 1,000 effective entrants, then fill the contests first that you can, and then fill the ones that you can get 700 effective entrants or 500 or so on. I think another responsible way to deal with that problem is the whole point of finding the 1,000 effective entrants thing is to find the softest contest possible, right? To play against soft opponents, because that's where we can maximize our ROI and we can have the highest ROI. If you cannot find contests that are very soft, right? Because you're playing NHL multi-entry or something like that, I think an appropriate response to that is to scale down your bankroll, right? Rather than playing 5% of your bankroll in contests that you think are going to be a little bit tougher, play 1%, right? And there are still, fortunately, good contests that are under $3 in the hockey world. So while the prize pools are smaller, not as popular of a sport, I think that the 20 max $1 hip check is not the worst contest you could play if you wanted to play some multi-entry hockey. There's a quarter jukebox too, which again, I know small prize pools, but again, probably a contest that you can find some decent edge there as well. So if you're playing sports where you can't follow the exact contest selection principles as we have exactly written them, like 1,000 effective entrants, I would still use those principles and just apply them as best you can to that particular sport. We had Mr. Clean and Couch on a couple weeks ago here now talking about a couple weeks ago talking about NHL DFS strategy. And those guys said that their favorite contests to play are the single entries and 3 maxes, where you can really get a lot more effective entrants in general. And that's what I've been sticking to. So I actually haven't really played too much multi-entry hockey. But I have been dabbling in just playing, 5 or less lineups instead on those single entry contests. So, and then follow up here. So on those contests, would you max them out, or would that become minus EV at some point? It's not necessarily minus EV to max them out, as long as the lineups yourself are building are still positive EV. right? I would say what I would recommend doing here is scaling back your bankroll maybe a bit from the 5% that we typically recommend. Come down, maybe play 1 or 2%, and play and see how you do. Track your top 1% equity in these contests. See how many lineups, what percentage of your lineups are making it into the top 1% after playing for 2 weeks. That's a small sample size, but it's better than one night. 2 weeks, maybe even a month, right? Playing at a lower bankroll investment, and see, can I build lineups where I am am I outperforming my top 1% expectation in these contests that only have 400 effective entrants? And if you are, it's probably positive EV for you to play them. If you're not, it probably isn't. So that would be my recommendation there. Okay, cool. So some solid contest selection back and forth there. I'm going to jump back quickly here and hit one more question I had in from the weekend here. And this actually came through our support channel here. And let me grab this here. Hang on one second. I got to find this here. This was a cool question here about kind of thinking about tiebreakers in your lineups in step 3. Okay. Thank you for being patient with me, everybody, while I track this down here. Okay, so this was from, actually, I think this was from Joshua, who's here today live. If you're still here, Joshua, give me a wave. But he said, when building lineups, if I don't make any changes and just go off your Sims lineups, what's the best way for a tiebreaker? I'm assuming the lineups I build in your Sim are going to be the same lineups used by many. Okay, so first off, let's talk about that second point first, because that's not necessarily true. Because of the way our Sim variance works, right? So let's say we're building lineups for the NBA main slate tonight, and let's say we're just playing a single bullet, right? On a traditional tool, traditional optimizer, if you press optimize, don't touch a thing, don't change any settings, right? You're going to get the exact same lineup as your number one lineup every single time. And that lineup will be like the optimal for that particular projection systems. That's the maximum number of projected points you can pack into a lineup while staying under the salary cap. And you will get that same lineup every single time, right? Which, again, not necessarily a good thing. There's a lot of natural variance in DFS. We want to capitalize on that variance when we're building our GPP lineups, right? Not talking about cash, talking about GPP. On SaberSim, if we sat here and ran, I'm not going to do this, but if we sat here and ran build after build after build, we will likely get slightly different lineups or even significantly different lineups, depending on how high your variance setting is, build after build, right? Because we're randomly sampling that set of game simulations for every game on the slate differently every single time. We're getting the natural variance of the game of DFS into our lineups, right? So you actually won't just be duplicated. But let's say you're building a single lineup, single bullet for tonight, and we don't need a full pool of 500 lineups. Maybe we want just a pool of 150. And we want to kind of pick a tiebreaker, right? How are we going to end up deciding on what lineup to play? Well, first off, the number one lineup in our pool that we're going to get here is not actually just the highest projected optimal lineup. It is the highest Saber scoring lineup, which is this algorithm that we have that takes into account the correlation and the ownership fade and the variance of the lineup to basically quantify what we think the highest expected value lineup is going to be, right? And that is always the 100 Saber score lineup. So let's take a look at this here. Okay, so I'm going to adjust projections here, just so we can see the lineups. Okay, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to click pool because I want to see all the lineups, and I'm going to slide this away so we can just look at our individual lineups. And I think for single entry, 3 max players that maybe are playing, I don't know, maybe even up to 20, but probably 10 or less lineups, I think this can be kind of a cool way to decide on a lineup, right? We see here the 100 Saber score lineup is our favorite. The second best lineup is actually also 100 Saber score. So SaberSim is saying these two lineups from our calculations are essentially the same. They have the same expected value overall. But even the next lineups, we're talking about 0.3 off from the Saber score. And as we go down here, we see that there are, even before we're down to 1%, 1 point of Saber score less, we have 8 different lineups, right? There are like approximately 8 different lineups here, even just going to Saber score of 99, that are all essentially equivalently equal. So how would we decide what to play? I think there's a lot of options. I think there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I think it's ultimately going to be kind of your call. I think one thing that you can do is maybe there's a particular player that you did some research and you want to be on, right? I think deciding that you end up wanting to play this lineup because Cole Anthony's in the lineup and he's going to be probably spectacularly low owned again because nobody wants to play Cole Anthony at 7,400, right? Maybe that's good enough, right? I think it's a good enough reason with the Saber score being this high, right? This lineup, I think, is a perfectly fine reason to do that. You could say maybe this is a low stakes contest that I'm playing. I'm playing the $2 elbow shot on DraftKings, and I notice that people don't seem to know what the best plays are often enough at the low stakes. So I'm going to maybe see if there's a lineup that's just projected a little bit higher. And looking from like a standpoint of projections, right? It seems like this is the highest projected overall lineup, right? So maybe you're going to pick this one instead. Maybe you take it from the standpoint of looking at total overall ownership sum. And you're looking at this here and you're looking at these top overall lineups and you think, okay, actually the first lineup showing up in the queue has the lowest overall ownership. This is my favorite lineup, right? There's all very, very strong lineups. They're all going to be very similar expected value in the long term. And I think playing any of these, actually really playing any lineup in your entire pool is probably viable. So what I would recommend doing is, when you're building your lineup, even if you're just playing a single bullet, is build yourself a pool of at least 100 lineups, even up to 500 is fine. And go with a lineup, like leave your mark on the lineup, right? Like it's almost more fun that way. Like it's the first lineup you get here is going to be great. And it's not just the SaberSim optimal. You'll get a different lineup than everybody else doing the same thing most of the time, right? I wouldn't worry about that. If the first lineup is truly your favorite, go with it. But especially when you're just playing a single lineup, I really like leave your mark on the lineups. I think it's a little bit more fun that way. You have a nice pool of viable lineups anyway. You know, there was a conversation in Slack earlier today about somebody that said they didn't want to play Cade Cunningham anymore, right? And while I don't think having a list of never again players is a very sound strategy for DFS in the long term, right? If you didn't want to play Cade Cunningham tonight, I think another approach would be to just X out Cade Cunningham and then look at what is... Do we not have any no Cade Cunningham lineups? Okay, we might have 100% Cade Cunningham lineups in our pool. So that was probably a bad example. Yeah, I think we do. So we have 100% Cade Cunningham. So maybe that particular player was a bad example. But that can be an approach too. So Joshua said, I'm still learning how to make adjustments in step 1. Yeah, I think that's valid. I don't make a lot of adjustments in step 1. To be perfectly honest, especially for NBA too. Our NBA model is really sophisticated. I think our projections are great. And also the biggest thing is that especially on an 11-game slate like tonight, right, there is almost certainly going to be late swap news that breaks here. And I don't want to have to undo a lot of my projections and things like that. I'm willing to just capitalize on the edge we get from being able to late swap at all and update to the news as the slate breaks. But I don't make a ton of adjustments. A lot of the adjustments I like to make on step 1 here are adjusting ownership. You know, looking at the slate, thinking about where I think the chalk is going to be. I like to watch, I watch other videos too sometimes to get an idea of where the field thinks the best plays are and make adjustments to the ownership projections. But even that, somebody went in here and moved all my columns around. Even that is by no means a necessity. I would say as you're getting familiar with the tool, and this goes for anybody that is new to SaberSim, I highly, highly, highly recommend you do as many of your adjustments in step 3 as possible, because what happens when you build lineups with SaberSim, this is even for multi-entry. Let's take a quick segue here into this, and then we'll move on to the next question. But even for multi-entry, right? If you build this pool of, I'm playing the and one. I need 20 lineups for the and one tonight. We're going to build you this pool of 500 lineups, right? All with the sliders that we have back tested and we think are optimal for this particular contest, right? And when you build your lineups, you're going to have this big pool of 500 lineups that we think are viable for the contest, and then all you have to do is pick 20, right? We're already gonna pick 20 based on our highest Saber score lineups, so that's already done for you as well. But there are 500 lineups here of which you only need to end up with 20. So I think making your adjustments in step 3 here allows you to basically kind of dial in and find what you think are going to be the highest expected value lineups, all while playing in this playground of 500 lineups that we already think are viable. It's much less risky to make adjustments in step 3 because you're not really affecting the system itself. You're not changing the projections or the ownership. You're just filtering and sorting lineups, right? So from here, we could probably X out. Cade Cunningham is a really high value play right now, so we might not be able to get away with this still. But we can. So we could X out Cade, right? We didn't have to disagree with his projection. We didn't need to go find a new projection for him to be at. We just said, I don't want to play Cade Cunningham tonight for whatever your reasons are, and X him out, right? And now we resort this and we get a new pool of viable 20 lineups, right? We've sacrificed a little bit of Saber score. We're using lineups with lower Saber score, but it's still a set of 500 lineups that fit this particular contest we're playing. So Joshua said, what does making adjustments to ownership do? I'm guessing this has been covered. Yeah, so what it does is, first of all, the ownership projections are what percentage of lineups we think are going to roster that player in a large field GPP, big contest, right? These ownership projections are going to condense quite a bit in smaller single entry stuff, right? Players that the highest projected plays are likely to be even chalkier in single entry and smaller field stuff, but it's our projection for how owned that player is going to be. When you build lineups, we have this ownership fade slider that the higher this is, the less likely it is to use a chalky player, a highly owned player relative to the average ownership at the position, right? So if this is 10, we're very much less likely to use highly projected owned players. If this is at 0, we don't care about ownership at all. So when I say making adjustments to ownership, I'm saying basically dialing these numbers in to be a little bit closer to what I think those ownerships of certain players are going to be, to make the ownership fade slider more precise, to allow the ownership fade slider to make sharper decisions for me. So, and it's not necessarily for every player in the pool, right? You don't have to go through here and for an 11-game slate, adjust the ownership projection of every single player. But typically, and I haven't studied the slate very much today, NBA, I don't start doing any research until like even sometimes an hour before lock. But by about an hour before lock, I'll start to have an idea of what the field thinks are the big value plays. And I just want to make sure that the ownership projections are about what I think they should be, right? So again, I don't know who those guys are going to be tonight. I do think this top 3 sorted by value are likely to be pretty popular. If Ayton is out, and I don't know if we'll get 8, we probably won't get 8 news before lock, but if Ayton is out, I want to make sure like guys like Kaminsky and McGee are up here. I think those are probably the big ones, but even these 2 ownership projections at the moment look a little low for me. So I would be likely to increase these here, at least at the moment, right? Because I do think these 2 guys are going to be a little higher owned than their ownership projections suggest. So cool. Awesome. Let's go ahead. Let's make sure I hit everybody's questions that came in live here, because I know I probably didn't here. So Nancy Drew guy said, when doing research builds 0, 0, 10 and having the sim variance at 10, if correlation and ownership is at 0, what is being factored in? Is it sim variance? Yeah. So what literally happens if you run a build here at 0, 0, 10 for any sport is correlation and ownership fade are just off. So every single time we build a lineup, right? So the first lineup we build, we're going to randomly select a game simulation that we have for every game here, right? So every game we pick a random game simulation, and then the lineup we build is literally the highest scoring optimal lineup you could have built for that random set of game sims. It is as if you simulated the whole slate out one time and then just built the actual highest scoring optimal for that particular slate, for that particular like sim. But then we do that 500 or 1,500 times. So the value of that is you get like basically a sample. You don't get to see all of the possible combinations of every game outcome, right? We talked about that last week. You would be like over 250 like trillion outcomes or billion outcomes or something like that, right? Can't do that, but we can see 1,500 potential outcomes, right? And get an idea of how often players show up in the optimal, etc. So that's what's happening there. Ryan said SaberSim is going to start dominating Yahoo NBA now. Yeah, so we do have, let's see, do we take the training wheels off this? Okay, so it does look like it's available here. So our entry editor for Yahoo is up. I would approach it with a little bit of caution. It works. It is solid and totally works pre-lock. For late swap, if you are multi-entering for late swap, like not multi-entering, if you are entering multiple contests for late swap, you have to upload those separately still. Like Yahoo does not yet have the infrastructure on their end set up to accept a multi-entry late swapped file. But it is working. It is up. The only other thing I would say here is that from what I've seen on Twitter, Yahoo is planning on rolling out more changes to the way they handle multi-entry. And we will adjust as quickly as we can if they push out more changes, but just keep an eye on that. I do think I've been playing a single contest multi-entry on Yahoo for the past week, take advantage of some of that lower rake and overlay you get over there. And it's been pretty awesome. And getting away with all my late swaps and everything like that. So, but Jared said, speaking of Yahoo, I entered 2 3-max contests. And when I went to enter my contest in the contest entry, it said I only had 3. I assume that's lineups entered. Is that something on their end or SaberSim? Difficult for me to say. I would say a few things. First of all, best advice I can give you is to use this download template file from Yahoo link and use this to download your lineups. Yahoo still there's a lot of confusing ways to get an entry file on Yahoo. And if you go into a specific contest and then download your CSV, it's only going to include the entries from that contest. So if you played 2 different contests, it won't have the others. If you click this download template file from Yahoo button, we will go directly to the right page on Yahoo and download the right file for you. And then we're just good to go. The only other thing I'm thinking is when you are late swapping on SaberSim, if you have a duplicate lineup in multiple entries, we will just treat that as one lineup that needs to be swapped, right? So if you're playing 2 different contests, but at lock you have the same lineup in both contests or the same set of lineups in both contests, we will treat that as only being 3 lineups that need to be late swapped. So that's the other thing I think could have happened here. If you had the same lineup at lock in both contests, when you go to late swap, you'll only see 3 individual lineups. And that's mostly so like if you intentionally enter the same lineup in multiple different contests, we don't suddenly late swap them and make them different, right? That's a feature, not a bug for the I don't know what the word is, turn of phrase, but that's what I was thinking there. So Reginald said that he's having an issue seeing OBJ in the player pool or the captain spot for the Showdown slate tonight. I will say things will naturally dial in quite a bit throughout the day, especially as we're running our final sim up to lock. I don't even know if he's projected. Is he here? Is he even in the player pool? Oh yeah, unable to add OBJ to the player pool. I would check. Let me check. Is he even actually in the player pool for the slate tonight? That would be my first question. Sometimes these guys that have recently changed teams are just not in the player pool. Let's look. Odell. Okay, so he is in the player pool. So we'll take a look at that. Figure out what's going on. It might be something that we just need to take a look at on our side. It's also possible that just at the moment on the most recent sims, we have 0 usage for him. But it's a little strange he's not showing up in here at all. So figure out what's going on there. But Rick said, new SaberSim user after the trial period. Welcome. After you do the test build and work with the research build, how do I adjust exposures on leverage? Are there some good videos on doing that? Thanks. Yeah, so here's what I like to look at here. So it looks like you've watched some videos on the test build and research build already, which is great. So let's run a build, and let's say we're pretending we're building our lineups for yesterday again. And 500 is plenty. I think there's really kind of like two different things that you can do on step 3, right? Or there's two different goals you might have for making adjustments on step 3. The first is managing risk and basically saying that even if this guy is a good play, I don't want that much exposure to him, right? Dearness Johnson is a great play, but I don't want to have 100% Dearness Johnson because I don't want 100% of my lineups to fail if he fails. That's one way to think about making your adjustments here. The other is actually getting like intentional leverage on a certain player or stack, right? Saying I want to succeed more than the average lineup does when this player does well. So I'm going to intentionally be over the field on that player, or vice versa, right? I want my lineups to shoot up the standings when this player fails because I don't have so much of him. That's kind of the other thing I think you can do here. So what I typically like to do is I like to use the leverage column as a tool for accomplishing both of those. So first of all, let's say we're managing risk, right? So one of the ways I typically won't be playing as few as 20 lineups on a slate, but let's say I'm playing like 150 or something like that. One of the things that I like to do is I like to look and get an idea of how owned is the most owned player on the slate going to be. And for an NFL, it's typically about 30%. And my personal risk, the way I approach a lot of these contests is I often don't want to be more exposed. I don't want to have more positive leverage on any one player than the maximum amount of negative leverage I could get on a player on the field. So the maximum negative leverage you could get on any player in the slate here yesterday would be a full fade of Dearness Johnson, which would give you negative 30 leverage. So one of the things I often like to do here is look for players where I have a much higher positive leverage than that. And in this case, it's only two guys. It's Johnson and Adams. So I might just use the leverage column and adjust the max exposure here a little bit to bring my overall exposure to those players down a little bit, right? I like Dearness Johnson. My lineups are poised to succeed more than the average lineup when he succeeds, but I don't need to be 55% overexposed to him, right? So I'll do that. And that's managing risk, right? That's not a leverage play. That's not intended to make the lineups have higher expected value. That's purely a risk question. But the other thing I like to do, and the thing that I primarily use my research builds for, is to determine specific players that I want to fade or play. And when I'm thinking about that, I always like to think about it from the standpoint of, again, relative to the field. But I often like to think about it as like 2x or 1/2 the field. So let's say for yesterday's slate, I think actually when I ended up doing my research, one of my bigger fades was Najee Harris. At the time I ended up running everything. So maybe on a guy like Najee Harris, right, I've kind of determined from my own research that I think he's going to be a little overowned. One of the stands I want this on to be on the slate is to be under on him. And maybe I want to just be half the field. So I'm going to go in and set a max exposure to 10, right? And then I can confirm, again, looking at the leverage column here, that now Najee Harris is like one of my bigger fades on the slate overall. So you can kind of use the leverage column. And then one thing I would want to do here is make sure that, again, you could dial this in here a little bit. It's a bit of a give and take. And kind of dial in your leverage again to make sure that you're not overexposed. Now, this isn't necessarily the right way to do this. I don't want to send everybody rushing off and say, well, Jordan said never be more than 30% positive leverage on an NFL slate. That's not what I'm trying to say, but I would say these are kind of the two things you should be thinking about here on step 3, is how much risk am I willing to take on any one player? How much positive leverage is too much for me? But then also, based on your own potential research that you may have done, what players do I want to be over or under the field on? And the last thing I'll note there too, I'll say two things here, is that some of this has already been automated for you, right? In the form of an ownership fade slider and sim variance. So in the ownership fade slider, we have already made kind of a decision on each individual player and determined whether or not it makes sense to use them in a lineup based on their ownership and their scoring potential. So you don't need, I don't want to say anybody needs to feel like they necessarily need to go in and find a couple guys to find the leverage on or whatever, because some of that's already happened here. And there are slates where I genuinely am like, this all looks good. I don't need to make any changes and I'm just going to roll with it. There are slates where I want to make a lot of changes. And we've also already managed your risk a little bit in the form of sim variance, right? Since sim variance is that high, you're going to get a relatively diversified and varied portfolio of lineups already. So any risk management you are doing on top of that is kind of in addition to that. It's on top of that, right? Your pool of lineups already is diversified enough for what we feel is appropriate for a contest that is the size and entry limit you told us you're playing. These sliders are back tested and have been back tested for this particular contest. So that's kind of, to sum it all up, right? Two things you're doing in step 3 really is you're thinking about managing risk and finding leverage, and how much or how little of those two things you want to do depends on how your particular approach to DFS is, that particular slate. And then to remember that some of this has already been is already being done for you in the form of those two sliders. So, but really, really good question. And Rick, hopefully that helps. Let me know. Let me know if that helps. So, okay. I saw there were some questions here that were coming in chat. I had my scrolled up looking at the original question here, but let me see. Nancy Drew guy said, do you think in the modern era of DFS, someone can be a full-time pro? I think it depends on how you describe, like, what you are calling that, right? I think a lot of the people that are very successful in DFS that make the kind of money that maybe you're thinking about when you think about a pro of maybe being full-time, are often sharp people and are good at other things and have other income sources. I mean, there are definitely plenty of players that make like full-time income on a yearly basis playing DFS, but it is a very small proportion of the DFS population overall. So it kind of cuts both ways. Like, yes, there are certainly people that can do that, make that kind of money. But it's also a very small proportion of the DFS population. So Kyle said, I've never played DFS and I always watch these. So entertaining. That's fantastic. I'm glad you find them interesting. Let me know what you like about these, especially as somebody that doesn't play DFS. I'd love to hear that. And if you're interested in checking it out, we have a free 7-day trial on our site, SaberSim.com. If you have never played DFS before, you have access to beginner contests and casual contests in the lobbies that are very soft and very easy to beat. So if I have inspired you to try DFS, Kyle, I'd definitely check it out. But also let me know what you like about my streams here, because that's great. I didn't know we were reaching a crowd here of people that aren't DFS players. So Joshua said, I'm going to go back and rewatch the NHL episode 2. Yeah, highly recommend that. That was one of our best streams there. It was really awesome to just have some people from our community on talking about NHL too. So Ponda said, follow up to the ownership question. If ownership is determined by how often that player shows up when making thousands of lineups at high variance settings, does that mean that's the optimal percentage? That's a very sharp, very, very sharp question. And okay, that's very sharp. I would say the answer is not necessarily with reservations. So first of all, when we build those lineups, we use them using a field aggregate projection source, right? So we're not just using SaberSim's projections. We're using a field aggregated projection. So I would say, first of all, the ownership projections are not necessarily going to be optimal, or how often that player shows up in the optimal lineup even, because we think that we believe that our projections are the best, right? And that there's like an edge to be had by having the best projections, right? If this was instead, and the ownership projections actually used to be generated this way, and this is why we made the change. the building a research build, for example, and running like this kind of build does basically approximate the percent chance of a player to be optimal, right? This kind of build is intended to approximate how often a player is to be optimal. And this is very similar to what we used to actually do to determine our ownership projections, which is why we changed them. I would also say, like, on the flip side of that, this kind of thinking, I think you're on the right track, and you can sometimes kind of identify, especially if you've been playing DFS for some time, and study actual ownership projections and keep an eye on how owned people are in your contests. I think you can sometimes identify certain players that aren't going to be as chalky as the ownership projections suggest, that are showing up there because it is the model picking up on a player that like is likely to be more optimal. Like, I think Kyle Anderson is maybe an interesting example of this. This is always really, I think this is easier to see on the NBA side of things, right? He's a cheap player that projects really well. And when we build these thousands of lineups, even with an average field average aggregate projection, we're seeing he's showing up in 17% of the lineups. I don't know if Kyle Anderson is actually going to be 17% owned tonight. I think in some ways the builder is kind of saying this is his optimal ownership. This is what a perfectly rational field will do. But this, I think this is going to be lower. I would be surprised to see Kyle Anderson at 17% owned, a top 10 ownership player on an 11-game slate. People hate playing Kyle Anderson, first of all, but I also just don't think this is a name people are going to get to. There's not like a big piece of news that's popping that would, unless I'm wrong, that would put him in these lineups, right? It's kind of an intuitive sense. So I think this is a sharp observation overall, that method of ownership projection can potentially have the flaw of being too optimized, right? Being too descriptive of what optimal ownership is. The one problem with that too, and I'll say this and then we'll move on. The problem overall, I think, with ownership projection and why ownership is very hard is because the field isn't perfectly rational and the field isn't going to make optimal decisions. That is an edge that gets taken advantage of in DFS lineups, but their suboptimal decisions are inherently random and chaotic, right? You can't necessarily, even if you had the model, even if we could have a model that perfectly said this is the exact optimal ownership for a certain player on a slate, you know that the field isn't necessarily going to do that, but you also don't really know in what way are they not going to do that. Right. And that's why projecting ownership is hard. And it's very hard at different stakes and at different contest sizes. Right. Like I say here all the time, smaller contests, single entry ownership is going to condense, but it's not always very easy to see how it's going to condense either. Right. Like if we go back to the NFL slate from yesterday. And let's look at our ownership projections just from NFL yesterday, since we have the benefit of hindsight here. And look at how we projected ownership. Right. So this is a pretty good example. So we had the Dearness Johnson and Mark Ingram, right? Two relatively same price running backs, both stepping into a starting role. I think Dearness Johnson was generally higher projected around the industry with SaberSim as well, but two closely projected players that projected for approximately the same ownership projection, right? The 30 and 23 is different, right? But like very similar. And I think it was probably easy to see if you maybe built some cash lineups or were studying the slate beforehand that these two players were going to be very commonly used in cash lineups, and also probably two of the guys where ownership was going to condense on these guys significantly in single entries. Well, when we flipped over all the cards on Sunday, what I saw, and at least a lot of the single entries I was playing, is that Dearness Johnson ended up being like almost 60 to 70% owned in some single entries, and Mark Ingram's ownership only condensed to like 30 to 35%, right? That kind of thing can be very, very difficult to predict because humans like have this like human element to it, right? Like there's this chaotic random element to DFS play overall. And like, it's the same deal tonight. I think our ownership projections will be very good, especially when the time comes, when we get close to lock and it's time to put the lineups in and then time to flip the cards over, but they are going to be wrong somewhere, right? Something's not going to be right here, but it is very hard to predict where that wrongness is going to be, because what the model is doing is assuming a rational group of people making these decisions, and they're not. The model is saying, give me an aggregate, show me what the aggregate field thinks about the slate. As if everybody it was this big homogenous group of people, right? All making decisions from the exact same inputs of projections, which also isn't true. And then saying, this is basically what a rational crowd would do with that information. This is how owned certain players would be. But not everybody has the same information. Not everybody's rational. Some dude's hand building 20 lineups from the bar. So it's tough. But anyway, sometimes I get on a little bit of a rant here. I like this question. It's a great question. So anyway, Brady versus Alex picks. How do you get to this website and generate lineups? We are SaberSim.com. SaberSim.com. Boom. Start my free trial. 7 days, no strings attached. You don't have to pay a dime. If you don't like it, cancel before your 7th day. You don't pay anything. I saw someone said, CK said during the trial period, is SaberSim fully unlocked? It is. We have 2 different plans. Actually, this is going to just take me back around now. It's going to log me in. Let's see pricing. We do have 2 different plans. So we have an $89.99 a month option and a $49.99 a month. If you start a plan for the starter, the $49.99, you don't have every bit of functionality. You don't have the ability to see more than 20 lineups at a time, right? So if you're going to play more than 20 lineups, advanced plan's probably better for you. You also don't have the ability to download our projections or upload your own custom projections. That's all in the advanced plan. But otherwise, during your trial for each individual plan, the tool is fully unlocked. Looks like I got through to Joshua here. Makes way more sense the way you explained it just now. So good. I think that was probably on the leverage and managing risk conversation. So Jared said, let people know the link won't use in Chrome. I will double check on that. I think it should. We've definitely tested that. But I will double check and make sure that it is working. I use Firefox, as you guys can see, probably. Yeah. But did mention Safari doesn't support the link. We'll check on that. I would recommend you guys don't use Safari in general. If you are going to use Safari, make sure that your version of Safari and your version of Mac OS are updated to the most recent version there. Older versions of Safari do have some issues with SaberSim. So I would say either use Chrome or Firefox, or if you're going to use Safari, make sure you are updated to the very latest version on both your operating system and your browser version. So CK said that's the option I chose. I assume that's the starter. It's totally fine, especially as you're just getting started. Building 20 lineups is going to give you plenty, at least gets you familiar for your first week. If you end up deciding that even just for the trial period, you want to check out the advanced, you can email us, support@sabersim.com, and we can upgrade your trial. It's totally fine, though. The starter plan's still a great plan. Definitely just probably better for people playing 20 or less lineups a night. So Kyle said, I'm inspired. I just deposited onto Yahoo for my first GPP. Would you say Yahoo is the best site for beginners? It's a very good one for sure. I think it probably has some of the softest fields overall. I will say, let me pull up Yahoo. And so I can't see them. Or maybe I can. Let's see. So NBA for tonight. Okay, so I can't see them. So when you are brand new, you will have these options to play contests that are called beginners only. Play those for as long as you can. You don't have access to them for very long. They will go away in the blink of an eye, but you will get to play only against other people that are playing their first contests on Yahoo. And armed with the power of SaberSim, you will probably crush those contests. Like a legit absurd ROIs are reasonable in I think when I ripped through all of my beginner and then after the beginner contest, you get access to these contests called no veteran contests on Yahoo. I ripped through those very quickly. But like 100% ROI is actually reasonable in your beginner and no veteran contests. So Tony said, I would say that Yahoo isn't as soft as it once was. Lots of shirts migrated from DK and FanDuel. That's probably true. I think that's fair. I don't think any site is as soft as it once was. But I still think it's a good starter point. I mean, one thing that's really nice, and I really don't think it gets talked often enough, is that Yahoo has the lowest rake of these big three sites by far. Like 4% difference between the big $1 on Yahoo versus a 16% rake on DraftKings is significant. 4% rake is a lot. If a contest overlaid 4%, I would be jumping in there to get into it. So getting less rake in your contests just for free, for nothing, is amazing. And coupled with that, a lot of these contests overlay anyway. Like they don't even fill. So it is. I think it's still. I think it's still a great place to start. And if you're going to be playing beginner and no veteran contests anyway, the contests are going to be super sharp until you at least get through those, or super soft until you get through those. So CK said, I've been playing without a simulation. This is going to get interesting. Yeah, I biased party for sure here, but I really do think it is such a massive edge to your DFS play, right? It is an enormous advantage because everything that happens on the court for basketball or for the field for football or for the diamond for baseball, right, is so affected by the state of the game, right? Oh, am I back? I think I'm back. Someone send me a message if I'm back, if you can see me before I start rambling again. I think I'm back. My internet blinked here. I don't know why that's been happening so much. All right, cool. I'm back. I don't know where I cut out. I was talking about simulations, the value of simulations, right? First of all, I will mention too, we have like a 45-minute video on our YouTube channel as well that goes into way more deep detail of why simulations are so valuable. Andy talking here for 26 minutes. DFS lineups are obsolete. DFS lineups are optimizers are obsolete. You need a simulator. This is a good video. Goes into more detail than I will here, but what I was basically saying is everything that happens on the court or the diamond or the field or anything like that, depending on the sport, or the ice, is dependent on the game script, right? Football team's going to run the ball more when they're ahead. They're going to throw it when they're behind. Basketball team, maybe Giannis plays 40 minutes in a super close game, but plays 28 in a game that's a blowout, right? The bullpen comes into the game way faster when one team's hitting really well. All this stuff, right? These are game scripts. This is the way the game gets played out is so variant, has so much dependence on what the overall state of the game is. And the only way you can accurately capture that is by simulating the games out play by play, one play at a time, right? That's literally how this works in our simulations is for football. If we're simulating a game, right? And you simulate the first play of the game. The second play that gets simulated, or the second game that gets kind of like that comes up in that particular game sim, is dependent on what happened on the first play, just like it is on the football field, right? And the plays that are showing up and the outcomes of plays that are showing up in our simulations in the fourth quarter are dependent on the score and the time on the clock and the timeouts that teams have, just like they are in the real world. That's why it's so powerful to have this information at your disposal for DFS. So, yeah, I will leave it there. I know it's been a great stream today here, about an hour and a half or so. Congratulations again to all of our giveaway winners and our winners of the weekly Max Challenge this week. Thank you for everybody that was here today, watching, asking questions, participating. Thank you to everybody that watches and listens to this show as a recording here. To all of our new viewers, I know we have a ton of new viewers today. Welcome. I do this stream every single weekday, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So come back again tomorrow. If you have questions the first time you're building your lineups tonight, first of all, if you're running into issues, shoot us an email or pop a message into our Slack community. But we'll be right back on stream tomorrow. So if you have questions for me after you're building your first lineups tonight, join me again here tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, and we'll go from there. But anyway, until tomorrow, good luck tonight, guys, and see ya.